G'day, Dr Karl here, and welcome to part 2, Facts and Myths about Electromagnetic Emissions. Now first, I should explain how wireless communication works, how we use electromagnetic energy to send information, like voice or movies. When you speak with your mouth, it travels only 50 metres or so max, but you can send a radio wave kilometres, or even around the world if you use shortwave. The shape of the electromagnetic wave is kind of like the shape of a wave in the ocean, smoothly going up and down, up and down. We call it a sine wave. But the thing that we learned to do around 1900 was to blend some ripples on top of that smooth wave, some extra information, which back then was just a human voice, but nowadays it can also be movies. So now, instead of a dead smooth up and down wave, we still have an up and down wave that has the same overall shape, but it has lots of little ripples blended into it. So you broadcast this ripply wave, and at the other end in the receiver you catch that rippling wave. Then you strip off the smooth wave, and you're left with just the ripple, the voice. You run that into an amplifier, then into speakers, and bingo, you've just invented radio! Now for the myths. First, the big one. Can living near a mobile phone tower give you cancer? No, it does not give you cancer. Let me explain. The regulations for electromagnetic emissions from telecommunications infrastructure, like towers and small cells, specify that the emitted radiation is nice and low. We measure this in power density, and it's typically between 2 and 10 watts per square metre. Now remember from part 1 that the sun is already delivering to us about 1,000 watts per square metre of electromagnetic emissions down here on the ground. But with mobile phone towers and the like, the amount of power you will receive is between 2 and 10 watts per square metre. So firstly, it's 100 times less than what the sun gives us. In fact, we've had nearly half a century of international and domestic peer-reviewed research, huge, expensive studies that looked for any harmful health effects from exposure to electromagnetic emissions, that's EME, coming from telecommunications. And they have found no harm. Nothing when operating within these safety regulations. Number 2, does 5G harm flora and fauna? That's plants and animals. No. And we have been looking. And so far, we've found no evidence of harm, which is exactly what you would expect, but we will still keep on looking. Third myth. Is 5G more harmful to human health than 3G and 4G? Well, firstly, no, because none of them are harmful, because they're all non-ionising radiation. But while we're here, let's talk about the different Gs in mobile phones. You probably know that there's a trade-off between frequency and range. If you are running at fairly low frequency, like in 3G, you might have a range of maybe 10 or possibly 20 kilometres, and it punches through vegetation and buildings really well. But you cannot transmit data quickly because the frequency is quite low. Now, as you work your way up to the higher frequencies, like in the 4G and in the 5G networks, you use higher frequencies, but they're nowhere near ionising radiation. Now, the advantage of higher frequencies is that you can transmit and receive data a lot faster, but the trade-off is that the range is less. In the case of 5G, in some cities, it can be as low as a couple of 100 metres. And of course, in terms of getting through vegetation and buildings, 4G is worse than 3G, and 5G is worse again, but the speeds are much greater. It's swings and roundabouts, which is why more infrastructure is needed to support these later Gs. Another myth? Well, what about the dangers of Wi-Fi in schools to your kids? Now, by the way, both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth run at around the same frequency as your microwave oven, It works out to a wavelength of about 10 centimetres, the distance across your palm. The amount of EME that the school kids are getting is very low, less than what they're getting from radio waves and TV waves. And yes, once again, we have been looking for harm from it. And yes, once again, we haven't found it. And now for part 3, the benefits.